Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Before we start, I need to warn you what you're about to hear isn't some campfire story. These are real events that happened to real people in Oregon, and some of them are still living through their nightmare right now. Imagine working your normal night shift and suddenly discovering something so terrifying that you wish you could forget your own name, or delivering a pizza to the wrong address and ending up somewhere you can never escape from. These 6 stories will show you that monsters are real and they're waiting in places you'd never expect. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because Mr. Midnight brings you the scariest true stories every single day. Trust me, after tonight, you'll think twice before taking that late night job or exploring that dark basement. All right, let's dive into the darkness. Are you ready? Let's begin. My name is Miguel Santos, and I've been a night janitor for 12 years. I started cleaning office buildings when I first came to America. Back then, I thought the hardest part of my job would be dealing with messy bathrooms and overflowing trash cans. I've cleaned blood from emergency rooms, scrubbed graffiti from school walls, and mopped floors in places most people never want to go. I always took pride in my work. A clean building meant people could do their jobs safely. It meant I was helping, even if nobody ever noticed. But what happened at Oregon State Hospital in Salem changed everything I thought I knew about helping people. I learned that some places aren't meant to be clean. Some places need to stay dirty, so the truth can't hide underneath. The hospital hired me in March 2019. They needed someone who could work alone, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions about the old parts of the building. Someone like me. I needed the job, and they needed someone who would keep quiet about what they might see in the basement levels. I thought they meant old medical equipment or maybe some rats. I had no idea what was really down there. Oregon State Hospital sits like a gray stone monster in Salem, Oregon. Built in 1883, the main building stretches for blocks, with newer wings added over the decades. Most people know it from that movie with Jack Nicholson. But the real horror isn't in the movies. It's in the basement levels that most of the day staff never see. My shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. 8 hours alone with 6 floors of hospital corridors, patient rooms, and administrative offices. The pay was good, better than any janitorial job I'd ever had. They even provided health insurance, which was more than I could say for most places that hired people like me. My supervisor, Janet, was a thin woman in her 50s who always looked tired. She showed me around on my first night, her keys jingling as we walked the empty hallways. The smell hit me first. That hospital mix of disinfectant and something else I couldn't name. Something old and sour that cleaning products couldn't quite cover. "You'll mainly work the first 3 floors," Janet explained, her voice echoing off the tile walls. "Patient rooms, nurses' stations, cafeteria, standard hospital cleaning. But twice a week, you'll need to go down to the basement levels. B1 and B2 are storage. B3 is, well, it's restricted. You'll have a key, but don't go down there unless it's on the schedule." She handed me a ring of keys that felt heavy in my palm. One key was different from the others, older, made of black iron instead of brass. It felt cold even after I'd been holding it. "What's in B3?" I asked. Janet's smile looked forced. "Old medical equipment, historical stuff they keep for research purposes. The state requires us to maintain it, but it's not really used anymore. Just needs dusting once in a while." The custodial closet was on the first floor, stocked with industrial cleaners, mops, and a cart that squeaked when I pushed it. Everything was standard except for one shelf marked with red tape. The bottles on that shelf were unmarked, filled with a clear liquid that smelled like bleach mixed with something metallic. "Special cleaner for the basement," Janet explained when she saw me looking. "The old equipment requires specific maintenance. Use these bottles only in B3, and make sure you wear gloves. The chemical can cause skin irritation." My first week went smoothly. The hospital at night was quiet, except for the essential staff. A few nurses worked the overnight shift, but they mostly stayed in the newer wings. Security made rounds every 2 hours, their flashlights sweeping through the dark hallways like lighthouse beams. I developed a routine. Start with the cafeteria, then work my way up through the patient floors. The basement storage levels were saved for last. B1 and B2 were exactly what Janet had said, rows of metal shelving holding old wheelchairs, outdated computers, and boxes of files. Nothing unusual. But B3 was different. The elevator to B3 required a special key just to call it. When the doors opened, they revealed a car that was older than the ones serving the upper floors. The walls were metal instead of painted drywall, and the buttons were worn smooth from decades of use. The first time I went down to B3, I expected more storage. What I found was a corridor that looked like it belonged in a different building. The walls were painted institutional green, chipped and faded with age. The floor was concrete instead of tile. Fluorescent lights hung from chains, casting harsh shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The smell was stronger here. Not just disinfectant and decay, but something else. Something that reminded me of the meat processing plant where my uncle used to work. Most of the rooms along the corridor were locked, but my keys opened everything. The first few rooms contained what Janet had described: old medical equipment, iron lung machines, primitive X-ray devices, electroshock therapy machines that looked like torture devices. Everything was covered in dust, but somebody had been maintaining it. The equipment was old, but it was functional. Room 12 contained files. Hundreds of manila folders stacked on metal shelving from floor to ceiling. Patient records dating back to the 1,920 seconds. I wasn't supposed to read them, but I was curious. These weren't normal medical files. They documented experiments. Lobotomies performed on children as young as 8. Electroshock treatments given without anesthesia. Drug trials that used patients like laboratory animals. One folder caught my attention. It was marked Mass Incident, the 15th of November, 1942. Inside were photographs and reports about a food poisoning outbreak that killed 47 patients in a single day. But as I read deeper, the story changed. According to the later reports, not all the patients had died from the poison. Some had been moved to Facility B for continued observation. That's when I heard the sound. It came from deeper in the corridor, past the rooms I'd already checked. A rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on metal. Tap, 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 then silence. Then tap, tap, tap again. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound. The corridor continued past where I thought it ended, turning left and sloping downward. My footsteps echoed off the walls, but underneath the echo was something else, a humming sound, like electrical equipment running. The tapping stopped when I reached the corner. I stood there listening, my heart beating loud enough that I was sure someone could hear it. The humming continued, steady and low. It was coming from behind a door marked Room 17. I tried my keys, but none of them fit. The lock was different from the others, newer. As I stood there trying different keys, I heard voices from inside the room. Not talking, screaming. High-pitched, desperate sounds that cut through the humming like broken glass. Then the sounds stopped. Complete silence except for the humming. I backed away from the door and finished my cleaning quickly. When I returned to the first floor, Janet was waiting by the elevator. "How was B3?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "Just dusty." She nodded, but her eyes were watching my face carefully. "Did you notice anything unusual?" I thought about the screaming, about Room 17, about the files documenting decades of experiments. "No," I said, "just old equipment." "Good," Janet said. "That's good. Some people find the basement unsettling. Old buildings can play tricks on your mind." But I knew what I'd heard wasn't a trick. Over the next few weeks, I developed a pattern. I would clean B3 quickly, but I always stopped at Room 17. The door was solid metal with a small window at eye level, covered by a metal plate from the inside. I could hear the humming every time, but the screaming only happened occasionally. I started bringing my phone to record the sounds, but the battery would die as soon as I got near Room 17. My flashlight would flicker and dim. Even my watch would stop working. Whatever was behind that door didn't like electronics. During my lunch breaks, I researched the hospital's history. What I found made my stomach turn. Oregon State Hospital had been a testing ground for experimental psychiatric treatments for over 60 years. Lobotomies, drug trials, electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation. The experiments had officially ended in the 1,970 seconds, but the records I'd seen in B3 went much more recent than that. I found newspaper articles about patients who had disappeared over the years. People checked into the hospital and were never seen again. The official explanation was always the same: transferred to other facilities for specialized care. But there were no transfer records, no documentation of where these people had gone. One night, I decided to explore beyond room 17. The corridor continued past the locked door, leading to a staircase that descended to another level. B4 wasn't on any of the building plans I'd seen. It didn't officially exist. The staircase was narrow and steep, with no handrail. My flashlight beam revealed a door at the bottom marked "Authorized Personnel Only." My keys didn't work on this door either, but it wasn't locked. Someone had left it open. B4 was different from anything I'd seen in the hospital. The corridor was wider, with rooms on both sides. But these weren't storage rooms. They were medical facilities. Operating rooms with equipment I'd never seen before. Machines that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. Everything was clean and functional, like it was being used regularly. The smell here was overwhelming. Disinfectant mixed with something organic and terrible. I covered my nose with my shirt, but it didn't help much. Most of the operating rooms had windows, and most of the windows had curtains drawn. But room 17, the room directly below the locked door upstairs, had its curtains open. What I saw through that window changed everything. Inside room 17 were people. Not patients in hospital gowns, but people who looked like they'd been there for decades. Their hair was white, their skin wrinkled and pale, but their eyes were alert and terrified. They were strapped to tables, connected to machines I couldn't identify. A man in surgical scrubs was working on one of them. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with steady hands and the concentration of someone who'd performed the same procedure thousands of times. He was removing pieces of the patient's brain while the patient was awake and watching. The patient's mouth was open in a silent scream. I realized why I couldn't hear anything. The room was soundproofed. But the patient's eyes found mine through the window, and I saw a desperation that went beyond fear. This person had been conscious and suffering for longer than I could imagine. I stumbled backward and ran for the stairs, but when I reached the first floor, someone was waiting for me. "Miguel," Janet said. She wasn't alone. 2 security guards stood behind her, both carrying radios. "We need to talk." They led me to an office I'd never seen before, down a corridor that required a key card to access. The nameplate on the desk read, "Dr. Morrison." He was the man I'd seen in the operating room, now wearing a lab coat over his surgical scrubs. "Mr. Santos." "Doctor," Morrison said, settling into his chair like we were having a normal business meeting. "I understand you've been exploring areas of the hospital that aren't part of your assigned duties." "I was just cleaning," I said. "No, you weren't." He opened a file on his desk and showed me photographs. Pictures of me in B3, reading patient files. Pictures of me at the door to room 17. Pictures of me on B4, looking through the window. "We've been monitoring your activities since your first week. Security cameras, motion sensors, audio recording. We know exactly where you've been and what you've seen." My mouth went dry. "I won't tell anyone." "Doctor," Morrison smiled. "I know you won't. You're undocumented, Mr. Santos. No family in the area, no close friends. You live alone, you work alone, and if you disappear, no one will report you missing. That's exactly why we hired you." "The experiments," I said. "Those people upstairs, how long have they been there?" "The current group has been with us since 1943, Dr. Morrison said. "Part of a study on prolonged consciousness during neural modification. We've learned so much from them over the decades. They've contributed more to medical science than they ever could have as ordinary patients. They're suffering. They're serving a greater purpose." "Doctor," Morrison stood up and walked around the desk. "And so will you." The security guards moved closer. I realized this wasn't a conversation, it was a sentencing hearing. "We've developed some fascinating techniques over the years," Dr. Morrison continued. "Partial lobotomy procedures that leave the personality intact while removing the ability to resist commands. The patient remains fully aware but becomes completely compliant. It's taken us decades to perfect the technique, but the results are remarkable." "You can't do this," I said. "We've been doing this for 80 years. "Doctor," Morrison replied. "Every janitor, every night security guard, every maintenance worker who discovers our research becomes part of the research. It's more efficient that way, and it ensures our work continues uninterrupted. They sedated me before I could run. I woke up strapped to a surgical table in room 17. Dr. Morrison was preparing his instruments, the same ones I'd seen him use on the other patient. The head was shaved and marked with surgical markers, but I could think clearly, too clearly. The procedure is quite simple, Dr. Morrison explained as he worked. We remove a small portion of the frontal lobe, just enough to eliminate your ability to resist commands while leaving your personality and skills intact. You'll still be Miguel Santos, but you'll be Miguel Santos who does exactly what I tell you to do. I tried to struggle, but the restraints were too strong. I could feel the anesthesia wearing off from wherever they'd sedated me, but they hadn't given me anything for the surgery itself. You'll feel everything, Doctor, Morrison said, reading my expression. That's important for the procedure. We need you conscious so we can monitor your responses and ensure we don't remove too much. The surgery took 3 hours. 3 hours of being awake while someone cut into my brain. 3 hours of feeling my thoughts change, my will disappear. I remained conscious the entire time, watching myself become something different. When it was over, I could think normally. I could remember everything, my life before, my family, my hopes and fears, but when Dr. Morrison told me to stand up, I stood up. When he told me to walk to the supply closet, I walked to the supply closet. When he told me to help him prepare the next patient for surgery, I helped him prepare the next patient for surgery. Inside my head, I was screaming, but my body obeyed every command without hesitation. That was 3 years ago. I've performed hundreds of surgeries since then. I've become Dr. Morrison's most skilled assistant. I can perform a partial lobotomy faster and more precisely than anyone else on his staff. My hands never shake, no matter how much the patient screams, no matter how young they are. Every night, I clean the hospital like I'm supposed to. But now I also help with the experiments. I strap down the new patients. I prepare the surgical instruments. I dispose of the failures. My job description has expanded, but my salary stays the same. The worst part isn't the surgery. It's the pride I feel when Dr. Morrison compliments my work. It's the satisfaction I get from a perfectly executed procedure. It's the way I've started to enjoy the look of recognition in the patient's eyes when they realize what's happening to them. The lobotomy didn't just remove my ability to resist. It's slowly changing who I am. Miguel Santos the janitor is disappearing, piece by piece, replaced by Miguel Santos the surgeon. And the terrible thing is, I can feel it happening, but I can't stop it. Dr. Morrison says that eventually, I'll take over his work entirely. He's getting old, and he needs someone to continue the research. Someone with steady hands and no moral objections. Someone who's been perfectly modified for the job. They bring new janitors to the hospital regularly. Night shift workers who won't be missed if they disappear. I help train them, just like Janet trained me. I show them around the basement levels. I give them the keys to room 17, and when they see too much, when they ask too many questions, I help Dr. Morrison bring them downstairs. I remember being horrified by what I saw in that operating room. Now I'm the one holding the scalpel. In a few more years, when Dr. Morrison retires, I'll be the one deciding who lives, who dies, and who gets to keep just enough of their mind to understand what they've become. The hospital hired me to clean up their messes. I just didn't realize that eventually I would become one of those messes. My name is Miguel Santos, and I've been a night janitor for 15 years. 3 of those years have been the longest of my life, and they're going to last forever. Asterisk. If you work alone at night, be careful what doors you open. Some jobs require more than they tell you in the interview, and some workplaces have been perfecting their training methods for longer than you might think. Asterisk, room 17 is still operational. Dr. Morrison is still recruiting. And if you're reading this, you might be exactly the kind of person they're looking for. My name is Tony Reeves, and I've been cutting timber for 12 years. I started right after high school, working the big forests up and down the Pacific coast near Florence, Oregon. My dad taught me everything about reading trees, spotting rot, and making clean cuts that won't hurt the forest. I've worked through storms that could knock you flat, dealt with bears that thought my lunch looked better than theirs, and cut down trees so big you could park a car inside them. But what happened last March in the Cedar Grove section changed everything I thought I knew about what lives in these woods. Some things in the forest aren't meant to be found, and some hungers can never be filled. The Cedar Grove section sits about 15 miles east of Florence, right where the Coast Range starts getting serious. It's old-growth forest. Trees that have been standing since before your great-great-grandparents were born. My supervisor, Rick Martinez, sent me out there alone because I knew how to handle the big cuts without a crew. The logging company wanted to clear a specific area for a new access road, but they needed someone who could work around the protected trees without messing up the permits. I drove my F-250 out there on a Tuesday morning, the bed loaded with my Steel MS 880 chainsaw, climbing gear, and enough fuel for a full day's work. The weather was typical Oregon spring, cloudy but dry, perfect for cutting. The Forest Service radio crackled with the usual morning chatter as other crews checked in from their sites. The Cedar Grove got its name from one massive western red cedar that stood right in the center of the section. This tree was something special, at least 800 years old, with a trunk so wide that 6 people holding hands couldn't reach around it. The funny thing was, when I got to the site that morning, I could smell something burnt in the air. Not like a recent fire, but old char, like something had burned years ago and never quite aired out. I parked the truck at the edge of the section and grabbed my gear. That's when I saw the big cedar up close for the first time. The bottom part of the trunk was completely hollow, not just a little hollow like you sometimes see in old trees, but burned out so wide you could drive a school bus inside. The opening faced away from the access road, which is probably why nobody had noticed it before. Walking around to look inside, I stopped dead in my tracks. The hollow went up into the tree at least 20 feet, creating a space bigger than my apartment back in town. And the smell, the smell coming from inside was awful, like meat that had gone bad mixed with something wild and musky. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it inside. That's when I saw the bones. They were scattered all over the floor of the hollow, mixed in with scraps of what looked like fur and feathers. Deer bones, I thought at first, but some of them looked too big. And there were deep claw marks scraped into the charred wood walls, like something with massive claws had been sharpening them. The marks were fresh, cutting through the old char down to pale wood underneath. I backed away from the tree and pulled out my phone to call Rick, but I had no signal. That was normal this deep in the forest, so I walked back toward the truck to get to higher ground. But I couldn't stop thinking about those bones and claw marks. In 12 years of logging, I'd never seen anything like that hollow cedar. According to the old-timers, these forests had legends. Stories about creatures that weren't quite bears and weren't quite anything else. My grandfather used to tell tales about something called the gumbaroo, a creature with skin like black rubber that could stop bullets and lived in hollow trees. I'd always figured those were just stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. But standing there, looking at that hollow tree, I started wondering if maybe some of those old stories had truth to them. I decided to set up a trail camera to see what was using the hollow cedar. It wasn't part of my job, but my curiosity got the better of me. I had a Reconyx game camera in my truck that I used for hunting season, so I strapped it to a Douglas fir about 30 yards from the cedar, aimed right at the opening. The rest of that day, I worked on the smaller trees Rick had marked for cutting, but I kept glancing back at the big cedar. Every time the wind shifted, that rotten smell would drift over, making my stomach turn. By evening, I was ready to get out of there. I came back 2 days later to check the camera and continue my work. The camera had taken 47 pictures over 2 nights. The first 30 were just empty forest, deer drinking from a small stream, the usual stuff. But picture 31 made my hands shake. Something huge and black was moving around inside the hollow cedar. The motion sensor had triggered the flash, and I could see this massive shape, easily as big as a grizzly bear. But the body was all wrong. The creature was completely hairless, except for some bristly whiskers around what I guessed was its chin. Its skin looked like black rubber, smooth and shiny, reflecting the camera flash like wet plastic. Picture 32 showed the thing dragging something into the hollow. It looked like a full-grown deer, but the creature was carrying it like it weighed nothing. In picture 33, I could see the thing's jaws had opened impossibly wide, like a snake, and it was swallowing the deer whole. The deer's antlers were still sticking out of its mouth, I flipped through the rest of the pictures. The creature ate constantly through both nights. It brought in 2 more deer, what looked like a black bear, and smaller animals I couldn't identify. In every picture, where its mouth was open, I could see rows of teeth that went back into its throat farther than seemed possible. The last picture, taken just before dawn, showed the creature looking directly at the camera. Its eyes reflected the flash like mirrors, and even in the still photo, I could feel something intelligent and hungry looking back at me. I should have packed up and left right then. Should have called Rick and told him we needed to abandon this section. But I'd been a logger for 12 years, and I'd never backed down from anything in these woods. Besides, what was I going to tell him? That I'd found some kind of monster living in a tree? Instead, I made the worst decision of my life. I decided to get a closer look. That afternoon, I hiked back to the cedar with my rifle. I'd brought the .30-06 I used for elk hunting, figuring if this thing was just some weird bear, I could scare it off with a warning shot. If it was something more dangerous, well, the .30-06 had never let me down. The hollow was empty when I got there, but the smell was worse than ever. I could hear something moving around deep inside the tree, up in the hollow space where my flashlight couldn't reach. It sounded like heavy breathing mixed with a wet chewing noise that made my skin crawl. I called out, "Hey, get out of there!" My voice echoed inside the hollow. The chewing stopped. Then I heard something that changed everything. A voice, not quite human, but forming words I could understand. It came from deep inside the tree, echoing down like it was coming from miles away. Fear makes meat better. I raised my rifle and fired a shot into the hollow, not aiming at anything specific, just trying to scare whatever was up there. The bullet hit the back wall of the hollow with a metallic ping, like it had bounced off steel. Then I heard the bullet ricochet around inside the tree before flying back out past my head, missing me by inches. Something massive started moving in the hollow. I could see the black shape descending, flowing down the inside walls like thick liquid. When it reached the opening, I got my first full look at the gumbaroo. It was bigger than any bear I'd ever seen, at least 8 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs. Its skin wasn't just hairless, it looked like black rubber stretched over impossible muscles. The thing's limbs were too long, and its claws were like foot-long knives made of bone. But the worst part was its face. It had small black eyes that showed too much intelligence, and its mouth was a lipless gash filled with rows of sharp teeth. I fired 3 more shots center mass. Each bullet hit the creature and bounced off like I was shooting a tire. One ricocheted back and grazed my shoulder, tearing through my flannel shirt and drawing blood. The gumbaroo's head turned toward me, and it breathed in deep through its nose. When it smelled my blood, something changed in its expression. Its mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. "You taste different," it said, the words coming out wet and slurred. "Fear makes meat better." I ran. I crashed through the underbrush toward my truck, branches tearing at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could hear the gumbaroo following, but not running. It was taking its time, like it knew I couldn't really escape. When I reached my truck, I threw my gear in the bed and fired up the engine. As I backed out of the logging site, I could see the creature standing at the edge of the tree line, watching me go. It wasn't trying to chase the truck. It was just learning my scent, my route, my habits. I drove straight back to town and told Rick I was taking a few sick days. I couldn't tell him the truth. He'd think I'd lost my mind. But I couldn't go back to that section either. Not yet. That night, I researched everything I could find about gumbaroos. Most of it was just old logger folklore, but some details matched what I'd seen perfectly. The bulletproof hide, the appetite that could never be satisfied, the way it lived in hollow trees. According to the stories, the gumbaroo could eat constantly without ever getting full. It would consume everything, animals, plants, even rocks and metal if it was hungry enough. But the stories also said the gumbaroo was smart. Smart enough to learn, to plan, to hunt specific prey over long periods of time. That's when I realized I'd made a terrible mistake by letting it smell my blood. I stayed away from the Cedar Grove section for a week, but I couldn't stop thinking about the creature. Rick kept asking when I'd be ready to finish the job, and I was running out of excuses. Finally, I decided I had to go back. I told myself I'd just grab my trail camera and recommend we abandon the section due to unstable trees or something. When I got to the logging site, my truck was gone. I'd parked it in the same spot as always, but now there was just torn up ground and pieces of metal scattered around. I found chunks of the engine block, twisted strips of the frame, and shreds of the tires. It looked like something had chewed through a 5,000-pound truck like it was made of paper. I was stranded 15 miles from town, with no radio signal and no way to call for help. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "You came back." I turned around and saw the gumbaroo standing at the edge of the clearing. In daylight, it looked even more wrong than before. Its black skin had a wet shine to it, and I could see the muscles moving underneath like snakes. But what scared me most was that it had grown. It was definitely bigger than when I'd seen it a week ago, maybe 9 feet tall now. "I've been waiting," it said, moving closer with that flowing walk that didn't look quite right. "Learning your smell, your fear." I backed toward the forest, but I knew it was useless. The thing could track me anywhere in these woods, and I couldn't outrun something that didn't seem to get tired. "The hunger never stops," the gumbaroo continued, close enough now that I could smell its breath. It smelled like rotting meat and something else, something chemical and wrong. "But fear makes meat better, makes hunger." Pause. I realized what it was telling me. The creature could eat me right now, but it had learned that terrified prey tasted better. It was going to keep me afraid as long as possible before it fed. The gumbaroo reached out with one massive claw and gently scraped it down my arm, not breaking the skin but letting me feel how sharp it was. "Run," it whispered. "Run, and be afraid. Makes meat better." So I ran again. But this time I knew it was just part of the game. For 3 days, the gumbaroo hunted me through the forest. It never let me get far enough away to feel safe, but it never caught me either. I survived on water from streams and huckleberries, getting weaker and more frightened with each passing hour. On the 3rd night, I collapsed next to a small creek, too exhausted to run anymore. The gumbaroo found me there just after sunset. "Ready?" it asked, settling down next to me like we were old friends. I was too tired to fight or run. Just make it quick," I whispered. The creature made that awful wet smile again. "No. Slow is better. Fear must last." It started with my feet. The gumbaroo bit through my boots like they were made of paper, but somehow its saliva numbed everything it touched. I could see my feet disappearing into its mouth, could hear the crunching of bones, but I felt no pain. Just a strange tingling sensation as the creature slowly chewed through my ankles. "Special saliva," the gumbaroo explained between bites. "Keeps meat fresh, keeps fear alive." It took hours to eat my legs. The creature chewed slowly, savoring every bite while I watched in numb horror. When it finished with my legs, it dragged me to a hollow log and settled me inside like I was some kind of horrible pet. "Travel, food," it said. "Eat, slowly. Make last weeks." The gumbaroo kept me alive for 23 days. Every few days, it would take another bite. A finger here, a piece of my arm there. Its saliva kept me from feeling pain, but I stayed conscious through everything. I watched as more and more of my body disappeared into that endless gullet. During those weeks, the creature talked to me. It had been alive for hundreds of years, it said, feeding on anything it could catch. Bears, deer, and when it was lucky, humans. Each person it consumed completely became part of its hide, their consciousness trapped forever in its stretchy black skin. As I got smaller, I started seeing them. Faces pressed against the inside of the gumbaroo's belly, their eyes still moving, their mouths trying to scream. Dozens of people the creature had eaten over the centuries, all still aware, all still trapped. "You join them soon," the gumbaroo told me as it chewed through my ribs. "All together, forever." When it finally swallowed my heart, I thought everything would end. But instead, I felt myself being pulled into that horrible mass of digested humanity. My consciousness merged with the others, but I stayed me. I could feel every step the creature took, every breath it drew, every new meal it consumed. Now I'm part of its skin, pressed against the inside of its belly with all the others. I can see through its eyes sometimes, feel what it feels. I know it's still out there in the forests, still hunting, still growing. The logging company thinks I just walked away from the job. They found my equipment, but no body, no blood, nothing to suggest what really happened. The gumbaroo has moved deeper into the mountains now, but I know it will come back. It always comes back when it gets hungry enough, and its hunger never stops. Sometimes, late at night when the creature sleeps, I can feel the other, trapped souls trying to scream. We all scream together, but no sound comes out. We're just part of its digestive system now, trapped forever in this living nightmare. If you work in the forests, if you see trees that are burned hollow, if you find bones scattered around with claw marks in the wood, don't investigate, don't set up cameras. Don't try to be brave, just run. Because once the gumbaroo learns your scent, once it tastes your fear, you'll never really escape. You'll just become another face pressed against the inside of its belly, screaming silently for eternity while it searches for its next meal. The hunger never stops. And now, neither do we. My name is Danny Chen, and I've been delivering pizza in Portland for 3 years. I know every street, every shortcut, and every building in this city like the back of my hand. I've driven through ice storms, dealt with drunk customers, and even had a few scary encounters with random weirdos on late-night runs. But nothing in my job training prepared me for what happened in March of last year underneath Old Town Portland. What I discovered down there wasn't just crime. It was something much older and much hungrier than anything the police could handle. I started working for Tony's Pizza Palace when I turned 19. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid my rent and gave me flexible hours for community college. Tony hired mostly young guys like me, students who needed quick cash and didn't mind working late shifts. The pay was decent, especially with tips, and Portland customers were usually pretty nice. Tony's Pizza Palace sat right in the heart of Old Town, in one of those brick buildings from the 1892. The place had character, with exposed brick walls and old wooden floors that creaked when you walked on them. Tony always joked that the building had history, too much history, he'd say with this weird laugh. He told us stories about the Shanghai tunnels that ran underneath Old Town. How back in the 1800s, people got kidnapped right off the streets and forced onto ships heading to Asia. Those tunnels are still down there, Tony would tell new drivers during training. But you don't worry about that. Just deliver the pizzas and come back. And whatever you do, never go down to the basement alone. That's a rule. I thought it was just Tony being paranoid. Old buildings have weird noises and creepy basements. Plus, Tony was always telling ghost stories to mess with us younger guys. But he was serious about the basement rule. The door was always locked, and only Tony had the key. The Shanghai tunnels were real, though. Everyone in Portland knew the cost stories. From about 1850 to 1941, these underground tunnels were used to kidnap people for forced labor on ships. They called it Shanghaiing, drugging someone and waking up on a boat to China. Thousands of people disappeared through those tunnels. The city had tours now, making money off the dark history, but most of the tunnel system was still sealed off and forgotten. Our delivery area covered all of Old Town and the surrounding neighborhoods. I knew which buildings were sketchy, which customers tipped well, and which streets to avoid after midnight. Most deliveries were routine. Most of college kids ordering late-night munchies, families getting dinner, office workers too tired to cook. Nothing unusual. But there was something about certain Old Town deliveries that always felt off. Some buildings gave me the creeps, especially the older ones with basements. Customers would take forever to answer the door, or they'd seem nervous, like they were expecting someone else. A few times, I heard voices coming from basement windows when I was walking back to my car. Probably just people hanging out, but it always made me walk a little faster. The night everything changed was March 15th, a Tuesday. I remember because it was the day before my college midterms, and I was planning to quit early to study. Portland was having one of those cold, rainy nights that made you want to stay inside. The kind of weather where delivery orders picked up because nobody wanted to go out. I'd already done 6 runs that evening, mostly to the usual spots. Around 10 p.m., Tony handed me an order for the basement apartment of an old building on Northwest Couch Street. The address was familiar. I'd delivered there a few times before, but always to upper floors. This was the first time for the basement. Weird order, Tony said, looking at the receipt. Guy specifically asked for basement delivery. Said he can't come upstairs. The building was one of those renovated 1,890 seconds warehouses, the kind they turned into trendy apartments. But as I walked up to the front entrance, something felt different. The lobby was darker than usual, and I could hear voices echoing from somewhere below. Not conversation, more like calls for help, but muffled and distant. I found the basement door unlocked, which was strange because most basement apartments had security doors. I called out hello, but got no answer. The voices were definitely coming from down there, though. They sounded urgent, like someone was in trouble. Every instinct told me to leave and call the police. But I was a pizza delivery driver, not a security guard. Maybe someone was actually hurt down there. Maybe they needed help. And honestly, I needed the tip money from this delivery. The basement stairs were old brick, worn smooth by decades of use. As I went down, the voices got clearer. They weren't speaking English. Some sounded like they were speaking Chinese, others in languages I didn't recognize. The accent was old-fashioned, like something from a history documentary. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a brick tunnel instead of an apartment hallway. The walls were old and stained, with water dripping from somewhere above. This wasn't a normal basement. It was part of the original Shanghai tunnel system. The voices were coming from chambers branching off the main tunnel. I followed the sound, thinking maybe some homeless people had broken in and needed help. The tunnels were bigger than I expected, with arched ceilings and rooms carved out of the brick. But as I got deeper, I realized this wasn't just abandoned space. There were people down there, but they weren't homeless. They were organized, moving with purpose. I heard footsteps and hushed conversations in English now. Something about shipments and schedules. This was some kind of operation. I tried to back out quietly, but my foot hit a loose brick. The sound echoed through the tunnel like a gunshot. Everything went silent. "Who's there?" a man's voice called out. I should have run. Instead, I called back, "Pizza delivery." I think I got lost looking for apartment 1B. 3 men emerged from one of the side chambers. They were dressed normally, jeans, jackets, nothing threatening. But something about their eyes was wrong, cold and empty, like they weren't quite human. "You're not supposed to be down here," one of them said. His voice had a strange accent, old-fashioned like the voices I'd heard earlier. "Sorry, man." The door was open, and I heard voices. "Just trying to deliver this pizza." "We'll take it," another man said, reaching for the pizza bag. As he grabbed it, I saw his hand. The skin was pale and cold-looking, with dark veins showing through. When our fingers touched, it felt like touching ice. "Payment's upstairs," I said, backing away. "I need to go get it." "No," the third man said. "You stay." That's when I noticed the smell, something sweet and sick, like meat gone bad. And underneath it, something metallic, the smell of blood. "Look, I just deliver pizzas," I said, trying to sound calm. "I don't see anything, don't know anything. Let me just go back upstairs and forget this happened." The first man smiled, but his teeth looked wrong. Too sharp, too many of them. "That's not how the tunnels work," he said. "Once you come down, you don't leave. That's been the rule for 150 years. They moved toward me, and I ran. The tunnels were a maze, with passages branching off in every direction. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps echoing off the brick walls. But no matter which way I turned, the tunnels seemed to lead me back to where I started. After what felt like hours of running, I found myself in a large chamber with metal bars across one wall. Behind the bars were people, dozens of them, sitting on the floor or leaning against the walls. They looked up when I burst in, and their faces were filled with fear. "Don't fight them," one woman whispered. "It only makes it worse." "What is this place?" I asked. "The holding cells," an older man answered. "Where they kept people before putting them on ships. Still serves the same purpose." Before I could ask what he meant, the 3 men from before entered the chamber. One of them was carrying a small metal cup filled with liquid. "Drink," he said, holding it out to me. "What is it?" "Same thing we gave them in the old days. Makes the journey easier." The liquid smelled bitter and wrong. When I refused to take it, 2 of them grabbed my arms while the third forced the cup to my lips. The liquid burned going down, tasting like medicine mixed with copper pennies. The last thing I remember was falling to the floor as the chamber spun around me. I woke up chained to a wall in a different cell. My head felt like it was full of cotton, and my mouth tasted like metal. The woman from before was sitting across from me, along with several other people I hadn't noticed in the darkness. "How long was I out?" I asked. "Hard to tell down here," she said. "Maybe 12 hours. They drugged you the same way they drugged people in the 1800s, opium and other things. What do they want with us?" The older man spoke up. "Same thing they've always wanted, bodies, but not for ships anymore. Now they sell organs, hearts, kidneys, livers, whatever brings the most money." I looked around the cell and saw names carved into the brick walls. Some looked fresh, but others were clearly old. Really old. I could make out dates going back to the 1860 seconds. "How is that possible?" I asked. "The tunnels never stop taking people," the woman explained. "Every generation, there's always someone running operations down here. Sometimes it's regular criminals, sometimes it's something else." "Something else?" Before she could answer, footsteps echoed from the main tunnel. Everyone in the cell went quiet and pressed themselves against the walls. A figure appeared outside our cell, but this one was different from the men who'd caught me. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, 200 necks, a vest and jacket like something from an old Western movie. His skin was gray and translucent, and I could see the brick wall behind him through his body. "New arrivals," he said in a voice that sounded like wind through dry leaves. "Good. Business has been slow." "Who are you?" I whispered. He smiled that same too-sharp smile I'd seen before. "Bunko Kelly. I ran these tunnels back when they were profitable. Still do, in a way." The woman grabbed my arm. "Don't talk to him," she whispered. "He's not alive anymore." Kelly laughed. "Alive, dead, what's the difference? The work continues. The tunnels need to be fed." He gestured to the walls around us, and I noticed for the first time that they weren't just stained with water. Dark red stains covered the bricks, and in some places, the walls seemed to be actively bleeding. 150 years of blood soaked into these bricks, Kelly said. Every person who died down here became part of the tunnels. Their fear, their pain, their life force, it all feeds the darkness. "You're insane," I said. "I'm efficient. The Shanghai trade was good business, but this is better. Organs bring more money than ship labor, and the tunnels get fed either way." Over the next several days, or maybe weeks, time was impossible to track, I learned how the operation worked. The men who'd caught me weren't entirely human anymore. They were people who'd been taken years ago, but instead of being killed, they'd been changed by whatever lived in the tunnels, possessed by the spirits of the original Shanghai bosses. The restaurant upstairs was just one part of a network that stretched across Portland. Pizza delivery was perfect for mapping the city, finding isolated targets, and getting into buildings without suspicion. Tony wasn't just my boss, he was part of it too, possessed by something that had been running tunnel operations since the 1890 seconds. Every few days, they'd bring in new victims. Some were other delivery drivers from different restaurants. Others were customers who'd ordered food to isolated addresses. All of them ended up in the cells, waiting to be processed. I watched as they killed some prisoners and harvested their organs. Others, like me, they kept alive for different purposes. The healthy young ones, they tried to turn into recruiters. The process involved drinking more of that bitter liquid and spending time in deeper parts of the tunnel system, where the darkness was thicker and the voices of the dead were stronger. "You can resist," the woman in my cell told me one night. "Some do for a while. But the tunnels are patient. They've been here for 150 years. They can wait." I tried to resist, but every day was harder. The liquid they made us drink didn't just drug us, it changed us, made us less human and more like them. I started hearing voices that weren't there, seeing faces in the brick walls. The boundaries between the living and the dead became blurred. The worst part was when they brought in people I recognized, customers from my delivery route, other drivers from Tony's, even my college classmate Marcus, who'd applied for a delivery job the week before I was taken. "Danny?" Marcus said when they threw him in the cell next to mine. "What are you doing here? Your family's been looking for you for weeks." Weeks. I'd been down there for weeks. They put pressure on me to help recruit Marcus. told him the delivery job was just a cover, that the real money was in special operations. They wanted me to convince him to drink the liquid willingly, to join the operation instead of becoming another victim. And the horrible truth was, part of me wanted to do it. The part that was becoming less human every day. The part that whispered in Bunko, Kelly's voice, that this was just business, that someone had to feed the tunnels. But Marcus reminded me who I used to be. When I looked at his scared face, I remembered being a normal college student who just needed a job. I remembered my family, my life above ground, my plans for the future. Don't trust anything they tell you, I whispered to Marcus during one of their recruitment sessions. Fight them as long as you can. That night, Kelly visited my cell personally. You're disappointing me, boy, he said. You could run this whole operation someday. Take over for Tony when his body wears out. But you keep clinging to your old life. I won't become like you. You already are. Look at yourself. I looked down at my hands and saw that the skin was paler than before, with dark veins showing through. When I touched the brick wall, I could feel the pain and fear of everyone who died there over the decades. I was becoming part of the tunnels. The change can't be stopped, Kelly said, but you can choose how you use it. Join us willingly, and you'll have power. Keep fighting, and you'll just suffer longer before giving in anyway. Over the following days, more people I knew disappeared from above ground. I learned that my family had reported me missing, and the police were investigating. But they'd never find the tunnel entrances. Kelly's people had been hiding them for 150 years. The tunnel system was bigger than I'd imagined. It connected to dozens of buildings across Portland, with secret entrances in basements, abandoned buildings, and even some businesses that looked completely normal. The network had been growing for decades, adding new sections and recruiting new operators. And I was becoming one of them. The physical changes were just the beginning. My thoughts were becoming darker, more calculating. I started seeing other prisoners not as people, but as resources. When new victims arrived, I felt hungry instead of sympathetic. The part of me that was still Danny Chen watched in horror as something else took control of my mind. They started taking me on recruiting trips to the surface. I'd visit pizza places, delivery services, and other businesses that could provide access to potential victims. My job was to identify young workers who were isolated, desperate for money, or didn't have strong family connections. I was good at it. Too good. During one of these trips, I saw my younger sister Sarah walking out of Portland State University. She looked tired and stressed, probably struggling with student loans like I had been. For a moment, the old Danny surfaced, and I almost called out to her. But the thing I was becoming whispered that she'd be perfect for the tunnels. Young, healthy, isolated from family while at school. No one would miss her for days. I followed her for 3 blocks before the horror of what I was thinking broke through the possession. I forced myself to turn around and go back to the tunnels, but the incident showed me how far gone I was. You're learning, Kelly said when I reported back. Soon you won't fight those thoughts anymore. You'll act on them. He was right. Each day, the old Danny became smaller and weaker, while something else grew stronger. I started enjoying the fear in new prisoners' eyes. I looked forward to the recruiting trips, to the hunt. After 2 months in the tunnels, they put me in charge of a section of cells. I had keys, freedom to move around the tunnel system, and authority over other prisoners. To anyone watching, I was now one of the operators. But deep inside, in a small corner of my mind that still belonged to Danny Chen, I was screaming. The tunnel system kept growing. Kelly's network had connections to other cities, Seattle, Vancouver, even Los Angeles. They were building a supernatural trafficking operation that stretched up and down the West Coast, all hidden in tunnel systems that existed, partially outside normal reality. Pizza delivery had become the perfect cover for expansion. Drivers could map entire cities, identify isolated victims, and access buildings without suspicion. We recruited drivers in every city, slowly building an army of possessed operators who looked normal on the surface but served the tunnel's hunger. I ran operations in Portland for months, then years. My human body stopped aging normally, sustained by whatever dark energy flowed through the tunnels. I watched Tony grow old and die, replaced by a younger manager who was also possessed by one of Kelly's lieutenants. The police investigated the missing delivery drivers, but they never found any evidence. We were too careful, too organized, and the tunnel entrances were protected by forces that made normal people forget what they'd seen. My family held a funeral for me after I'd been missing for a year. I watched from the shadows as my parents and sister cried over an empty coffin. I wanted to comfort them, to tell them I was still alive. But I wasn't. Not really. The thing wearing Danny Chen's face was a predator now, sustained by the suffering of others and bound to the tunnels forever. I could never leave, never die, never return to the human world. But sometimes, late at night in the deepest parts of the tunnel system, the real Danny Chen still exists. Trapped in a corner of my own mind, watching helplessly as my body commits atrocities in service of Kelly's eternal hunger. And the worst part is knowing that this cycle will never end. Every year, we recruit more delivery drivers. Every year, the tunnel network grows larger. Every year, more people disappear into the darkness beneath Portland. If you're thinking about taking a delivery job in Portland, don't. And if you already work for a pizza place in Old Town, pay attention to where they send you. If your manager ever asks you to deliver to a basement, or if you hear voices calling for help from Iberpudet underground, just walk away. Because once the tunnels notice you, once they mark you as prey, there's no escape. The hunger down here is older than the city itself, and it's always looking for new blood to feed on. My name was Danny Chen, and I delivered pizza in Portland for 3 years. Now I deliver something else entirely, and I've been doing it for much longer than any human should be able to survive. The tunnels are still here, they're still taking people. And somewhere in the darkness beneath your feet, we're always recruiting. My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and I've been a crisis counselor for the Oregon Department of Human Services for 12 years. I specialize in adolescent psychological emergencies and family trauma intervention. I've handled suicide attempts, domestic violence cases, and severe mental health crises that would break most people. I thought I'd seen everything that could go wrong with a teenage mind. But what happened in Lafayette, Oregon, during the fall of 2023, changed everything I thought I knew about human nature and the supernatural forces that can possess a young soul. I'm telling this story because the official reports are all lies. The government blamed it on a gas leak explosion. They said the fires were caused by faulty electrical systems. They never mentioned Ashley Warren, the 17-year-old girl who burned half the Pacific Northwest to ash with nothing but her bare hands. They never talked about the ancient curse that turned an innocent high school senior into a living flame demon that killed millions. I was there. I watched it happen. And I'm probably the only person left alive who knows the truth about what really destroyed our world. ***, Section 2. Professional context and setup, ***. The call came in on October 15, 2023, around 2:30 inches the afternoon. I was finishing up paperwork at our field office in Salem when my supervisor, Janet, knocked on my door. She looked worried, which was unusual for her. "Sarah, we need you in Lafayette immediately," she said, holding a manila folder. "Emergency placement situation. 17-year-old girl, just moved to town with her mother. The school counselor is requesting immediate intervention." Lafayette was a small town about 40 minutes south of Salem. Population, maybe 3,000 people. Nothing much ever happened there except the occasional domestic dispute or teenage shoplifting incident. I grabbed my emergency response kit, which included crisis assessment forms, emergency contact sheets, and the state-issued laptop with access to the juvenile mental health database. The drive to Lafayette took me through rolling hills covered in autumn colors. My Honda Civic handled the winding county roads easily, and I used the time to review the preliminary file. Ashley Warren, born April 3, 2006, recently relocated from Phoenix with her single mother, Linda Warren. No father listed on any documents, no previous mental health interventions or criminal history. Good grades, honor roll student. On paper, she looked like a normal teenager dealing with the stress of moving to a new town. Lafayette High School was a typical small-town facility built in the 1962, single-story brick buildings connected by covered walkways. I'd been there before for other cases. The main office was located in the central building, with fluorescent lighting that always made everyone look pale and tired. Mrs. Patterson, the school counselor, met me at the front desk. She was in her 50s, normally calm and collected, but today her hands were shaking slightly. "Dr. Mitchell, thank God you're here," she said, leading me down the hallway toward her office. "Ashley Warren started here 3 weeks ago. Everything seemed fine at first, but in the last week, there have been incidents. We passed classroom windows where I could see students bent over textbooks, completely unaware that their world was about to change forever. Mrs. Patterson's office was small and cramped, with motivational posters on the walls and a desk covered in student files. She closed the door and sat down across from me. "What kind of incidents?" I asked, pulling out my assessment forms. "Strange things," she said, lowering her voice. "Last Monday, Ashley was in the bathroom when the paper towel dispenser caught fire. No electrical problems, no one smoking. It just burst into flames. The janitor put it out, and we assumed it was some kind of malfunction. I made notes on my forms. Sometimes stress manifested in unusual ways, but spontaneous fires were not typical teenage behavior. Then on Wednesday, she was in my office for a routine check-in about adjusting to the new school. She seemed upset about something, wouldn't tell me what. I stepped out for maybe 2 minutes to get her some water, and when I came back, my desk calendar was completely burned. Just the calendar, nothing else. Ashley was sitting in the same chair, looking confused. "Where is Ashley now?" I asked. "Homesick today. Her mother called this morning saying Ashley had a fever and needed to rest. But Dr. Mitchell, there's something else." Mrs. Patterson opened her desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. "I did some research on the Warren family after the fire incidents. Ashley's grandmother was Margaret Greenwood before she married. Margaret was born here in Lafayette in 1920. She handed me a photocopied newspaper article dated 1845. The headline read, 'Local woman hanged for witchcraft, Rebecca Greenwood executed for practicing dark arts.' According to town records, Rebecca Greenwood was accused of witchcraft in 1845. She was tortured and hanged right here in Lafayette. Before she died, she supposedly cursed the town to burn 3 times. Lafayette burned in 1861 during a mysterious fire that killed 30 people. It burned again in 1894, another unexplained fire that destroyed half the town. Everyone thought it was just coincidence." I stared at the newspaper clipping. As a mental health professional, I didn't believe in curses or supernatural explanations for human behavior, but the timing was disturbing. The descendant of Rebecca Greenwood moving back to Lafayette just as strange fires started happening around her descendant. "I need to see Ashley immediately," I said. Section 3. First anomaly Mrs. Patterson gave me the Warren family's address. 147 Pine Street, a small rental house on the edge of town. I drove through Lafayette's quiet residential area, noting the old wooden houses and tall pine trees that would burn so easily if exposed to flame. The Warren house was a modest single-story home with white siding and a small front porch. Linda Warren answered my knock. She was a thin woman in her early 40s, with tired eyes and prematurely gray hair. She looked like someone who'd been running from something for a long time. "Miss Warren, I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the Department of Human Services. The school asked me to check on Ashley's well-being." "Is Ashley in trouble?" Linda asked, wrapping her arms around herself. "Not at all. I just want to make sure she's adjusting well to the move. May I come in?" The house was sparsely furnished, with moving boxes still stacked in corners. It smelled like something had been burned recently, though I couldn't identify what. Linda led me to the living room, where Ashley was sitting on a couch watching television. Ashley Warren was a pretty girl with long dark hair and pale skin. She looked physically healthy, but there was something unsettling about her eyes. They seemed older than 17, filled with an anger that didn't match her age. When she looked at me, I felt an unexpected chill run down my spine. "Ashley, this is Dr. Mitchell. She's here to help you settle into your new school." "I don't need help," Ashley said quietly. Her voice had an unusual quality, like there was an echo behind it. I sat down across from her, maintaining professional distance. "How are you feeling about Lafayette so far?" "It's fine." Ashley's answers were short, but she maintained eye contact. No signs of typical teenage anxiety or depression. If anything, she seemed unnaturally calm. your counselor mentioned you've had some stressful moments at school. Sometimes moving to a new place can bring up difficult emotions. Ashley's expression changed slightly. For just a moment, her eyes seemed to flash with genuine anger. This town deserves what's coming to it. What do you mean by that, Ashley? Before she could answer, the temperature in the room suddenly dropped at least 10 degrees. I could see my breath in the air. Linda Warren wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. Ashley, honey, are you feeling all right? Linda asked. Ashley stood up abruptly. As she did, the television screen flickered and went black. Then the lamp next to the couch started sparking. Not electrical sparking, actual flames began dancing along the lampshade. Ashley, step away from the lamp, I said, maintaining my calm professional voice while reaching for my cell phone to call the fire department. I'm not doing anything, Ashley said, but her voice had changed. It was deeper now, with an accent I couldn't place. This is just the beginning. They hanged me in 1845, but I promised I'd burn this town 3 times. Twice wasn't enough. The flames on the lamp spread to the curtains. Linda Warren screamed and ran to get a fire extinguisher from the kitchen. I grabbed Ashley's arm to lead her outside, and the moment I touched her skin, I felt like I'd grabbed a hot stove. The heat was so intense that I could smell my own skin burning. Let go of me, Ashley said in that strange, deep voice. You don't understand what I am now. I released her arm and saw that my palm had actual burn marks in the shape of fingerprints. Ashley walked calmly toward the front door while the living room filled with smoke. The fires were spreading impossibly fast, jumping from object to object without any logical pattern. Outside on the front lawn, Linda Warren was crying and trying to call 911, but her cell phone kept malfunctioning. The screen would light up for a few seconds, then go completely black. Ashley stood in the middle of the yard, watching her house burn. The fire department sirens were getting louder, but I had a terrible feeling they wouldn't be able to stop what was happening. Ashley, can you hear me? I asked, keeping my distance. She turned to look at me, and her eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, the entire eye, like looking into empty space. Ashley's still in here, she said in that ancient voice. But Rebecca Greenwood is driving now, and we have work to finish. Asterisk, asterisk. Section 4. Escalation of supernatural events. Asterisk, asterisk. The Lafayette Fire Department arrived within 6 minutes, but by then, the entire Warren house was engulfed in flames that burned hotter and faster than anything I'd ever seen. Chief Reynolds later told me the fire reached temperatures over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel. Normal house fires rarely exceed 1,100 degrees. Ashley stood in the front yard, completely calm, while her mother sobbed and firefighters aimed their hoses at the blaze. The water turned to steam before it could reach the flames. Ashley's eyes had returned to normal, and she seemed genuinely confused about what was happening. Dr. Mitchell, why is my house on fire? She asked in her regular teenage voice. You don't remember what just happened? I asked, showing her the burn marks on my palm. Ashley stared at my injured hand in horror. I did that? But I don't remember. I was just sitting on the couch, and then... Then what, Ashley? Then I was standing outside watching everything burn. Like I was dreaming, but awake. She looked at me with genuine fear in her eyes. Dr. Mitchell, I think something's wrong with me. I made the decision to take Ashley into emergency protective custody. Her mother had nowhere else to go, and I needed to get Ashley to a controlled environment where we could monitor her condition. The nearest juvenile psychiatric facility was in Salem, about an hour away. During the drive back to Salem, Ashley seemed like a completely normal teenager. She was worried about her mother, upset about losing her belongings in the fire, and confused about what had happened. She had no memory of speaking in that strange voice or causing the fires. But every few minutes, the car's temperature gauge would spike into the red zone for no mechanical reason. I checked Ashley into Willamette Valley Youth Crisis Center under a temporary 72-hour hold for psychological evaluation. Dr. James Hartley, the facility's chief psychiatrist, conducted the intake interview while I observed from behind one-way glass. Ashley, I want you to tell me about any unusual experiences you've had recently. Dreams, voices, feelings that seem different from normal. I've been having dreams about a woman, Ashley said. She's always on fire, but the flames don't hurt her. She's angry about something that happened a long time ago. She tells me that people in Lafayette need to pay for what they did to her. What did they do to her? They hanged her. She says she was innocent, but they tortured her and killed her anyway. She wants revenge. Dr. Hartley made notes. From a psychiatric perspective, Ashley was describing trauma-induced hallucinations, possibly triggered by the stress of moving to a town where her ancestor had died violently. It was a textbook case of adolescent adjustment disorder with psychotic features. But I couldn't forget the impossible heat of Ashley's skin or the way fires had spread through her house, defying all natural laws. On Ashley's second day at the facility, 3 separate incidents convinced me we were dealing with something beyond normal psychiatric intervention. First, during group therapy, Ashley became upset when another patient made a comment about her family. The sprinkler system in the therapy room activated, but instead of water, scalding steam poured from the nozzles. 2 other patients suffered second-degree burns before staff could evacuate the room. Second, Ashley's room temperature was consistently measured at 85 degrees Fahrenheit, even though the building's climate control system was set to 72 degrees. Maintenance checked the heating system 3 times and found no mechanical problems. Third, and most disturbing, Ashley began speaking in languages she'd never learned. During a private session with Dr. Hartley, she spoke for 20 minutes in what linguistic experts later identified as 17th century English dialect, mixed with phrases in Latin and what might have been an indigenous language from the Pacific Northwest. Dr. Hartley called me on Ashley's 3rd day. "Sarah, I need you to come in immediately. Something's happening that I can't explain through conventional psychiatric treatment." *** Section 5. Climactic supernatural encounter ***. When I arrived at Willamette Valley Youth Crisis Center, the parking lot was filled with fire trucks and police cars. Dr. Hartley met me at the front entrance, and I could see that his normally calm demeanor was completely shattered. "It started an hour ago," he said as we walked quickly through the lobby. Ashley was in the common room watching television with other patients when she suddenly stood up and began speaking in that strange voice again. But this time, she didn't stop. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where Ashley's room was located. I could hear her voice echoing down the hallway. That deep, ancient voice that didn't belong in a 17-year-old girl's throat. "They hanged me for crimes I never committed," the voice was saying. "They tortured me in their church basement for 3 days before they put the rope around my neck. I promised them I would burn this place 3 times, and the 3rd time will be the last time." Ashley's room was at the end of the hall. Through the reinforced window, I could see her standing in the center of the room, but she looked different. Her dark hair was floating around her head as if she were underwater. Her eyes were completely black again, and her skin was glowing with a faint orange light. "Where are the other patients?" I asked. "Evacuated to the 1st floor. Ashley's room temperature has risen to over 120 degrees. The fire department says if it gets much hotter, the sprinkler system will activate, but they're afraid the water will just turn to steam and scald everyone in the building." I approached Ashley's door. The metal handle was too hot to touch with bare hands. "Ashley, can you hear me? It's Dr. Mitchell." She turned toward my voice, and when those black eyes focused on me, I felt like I was staring into an open furnace. "The doctor comes to save the child," Rebecca Greenwood's voice said through Ashley's mouth. "But the child is mine now. Ashley Warren is strong enough to carry my fire. Strong enough to finish what was started in 1845. What do you want, Rebecca?" "Justice. Every family in Lafayette descends from the people who murdered me. The mayor, the sheriff, the judge, the preacher, all their bloodlines still live in my town. They will burn. Then their children will burn. Then everyone will burn until the whole world pays for what they did to an innocent woman." The temperature in the hallway was rising rapidly. Paint on the walls began to bubble and peel. The smoke detectors throughout the building started shrieking. "Ashley's still in there," I said. "I can help her fight you." Rebecca laughed, and it was the most terrifying sound I'd ever heard. "Ashley doesn't want to fight me anymore. She likes the power. She likes watching people burn. Yesterday, she was a frightened child. Today, she is becoming something much more dangerous." Through Ashley's face, I could see glimpses of the teenager I'd met just 3 days earlier. But those moments were becoming shorter and less frequent. Rebecca Greenwood's possession was getting stronger. "Show her," Rebecca commanded. Ashley raised her hand toward the reinforced window. Flames erupted from her palm, Not the orange-red flames of a normal fire, but blue-white flames that burned so hot they made the air shimmer like a different mirage. The reinforced glass, designed to withstand significant impact, melted like ice cream. "This is what I can do through her now," Rebecca said. "But this is nothing compared to what comes next. Tonight, when the moon rises, I will take complete control. Ashley Warren will cease to exist, and Rebecca Greenwood will walk the earth again in a body that can channel the fires of hell itself." "Doctor," Hartley grabbed my arm. "Sarah, we need to evacuate. The building's structural integrity is compromised." But I couldn't leave Ashley. Despite everything I'd witnessed, she was still a 17-year-old girl trapped inside a supernatural nightmare. "Ashley, if you can hear me, you have to fight," I called through the melted window. "This isn't who you are. You're stronger than this curse." For just a moment, Ashley's eyes returned to their normal brown color. Her voice, her real voice, spoke in a whisper. "Dr. Mitchell, I can't control it anymore. She's too strong, and I think I'm starting to like what she can do. Help me before I become something that can't be helped." Then Rebecca took control again, and Ashley's eyes went black. "Too late, Doctor. Tonight, Lafayette burns for the third and final time, and then the fire spreads until every person who shares blood with my murderers is ash." The building's evacuation alarm began blaring. "Doctor." Hartley pulled me away from Ashley's room as the floor beneath our feet grew hot enough to feel through our shoes. As we fled down the stairwell, I could hear Ashley laughing, or Rebecca laughing through Ashley. It was a sound that promised death for everyone who heard it. ***, Section 6, Resolution and Aftermath. ***, that night, October 18, 2023, Lafayette burned for the third time. I watched it happen from a hill 2 miles outside of town, standing next to emergency response vehicles that were powerless to stop what was unfolding. Ashley had escaped from Willamette Valley Youth Crisis Center by walking through walls that melted at her touch. She'd traveled the 40 miles back to Lafayette in less than 2 hours, moving faster than any human could run. The fires started at exactly midnight. Ashley appeared in the center of Lafayette's main street, floating 6 feet above the ground, her entire body glowing like a living torch. She raised her arms, and every building in a 3-block radius simultaneously burst into flames. But these weren't ordinary fires. The flames were blue-white and moved with purpose, seeking out specific targets. I watched through binoculars as the fire traced genealogical lines through the town, burning the descendants of everyone who had participated in Rebecca Greenwood's execution in 1845. Mayor Davidson burned in his office. Sheriff Morrison's entire family burned in their sleep. Judge Patterson, a descendant of the 1845 judge who had sentenced Rebecca, burned alive in his driveway as he tried to escape. The fires spread faster than wind could carry them. They jumped over fire breaks, ignored water barriers, and burned through materials that should have been flame-resistant. Within 3 hours, all of Lafayette was burning, and the fires were spreading to neighboring towns. The National Guard arrived at dawn, but their equipment was useless. Bullets fired at Ashley disintegrated before they could reach her. Water and fire retardant turned to steam. Even military-grade flame suppressants had no effect on the supernatural fires. By the end of the first week, Ashley had burned through 6 Oregon counties. Her fires moved at an impossible speed, consuming entire cities in hours. Portland burned in a single night. Salem was ash by the following morning. I submitted my final report to the Department of Human Services on October 25, 2023, exactly 10 days after I'd first met Ashley Warren. The report detailed everything I'd witnessed, including the supernatural possession and Ashley's transformation into a being capable of generating fires that burned hotter than anything on Earth. The report was classified immediately and buried in files that would never see public review. Officially, the fires were blamed on a combination of unusually dry weather conditions, faulty electrical systems, and a series of unfortunate accidents. But I know the truth. I was there. Ashley Warren, the 17-year-old girl who just wanted to fit into a new school, became something far worse than Rebecca Greenwood had ever been. The original curse called for Lafayette to burn 3 times. But Ashley couldn't stop burning things after the curse was fulfilled. Rebecca's spirit had awakened something in Ashley that was purely destructive, and that destruction became addictive. Within 6 months, Ashley had burned through 12 states. The federal government tried everything: military intervention, evacuations, even nuclear weapons. Nothing could stop her. The fires she created burned souls as well as bodies, trapping the spirits of her victims in eternal flame. I'm writing this from a refugee camp in Alaska, one of the few places Ashley hasn't reached yet. But I can see the orange glow on the southern horizon getting brighter every night. The geologists say she's burned through most of Canada now and is moving north toward the Arctic Circle. They estimate that Ashley has killed over 200 million people in the 18 months since she escaped from Willamette Valley Youth Crisis Center. She's no longer recognizable as human. Satellite images show her as a pillar of flame over 300 feet tall, moving across the landscape at speeds approaching 200 miles per hour. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if there's still some part of Ashley Warren trapped inside that burning monster. I wonder if she remembers being a normal teenager who just wanted to fit in at a new school. I wonder if she regrets becoming the thing that destroyed our world. But mostly, I wonder how long it will be before the flames reach Alaska, and whether dying in Ashley's supernatural fire is better than living in a world where hope burned to ash along with everything else we used to call home. My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and I was the last person to speak with Ashley Warren before she became the burning goddess who ended human civilization. If you're listening to this recording, it means you're probably already dead, and your soul is burning in Ashley's eternal flames along with the rest of us. I'm sorry we couldn't save her. I'm sorry we couldn't save any of you. The fire is almost here now. I can feel the heat through the walls. My name is Sarah Kim, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years. I started working for the Oregon Department of Forestry right after college, spending most of that time in the Cascade Mountains. I've dealt with lost hikers, angry bears, forest fires, and even the occasional drug lab hidden in the woods. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. But what happened last October in the remote sections of Mount Hood National Forest changed everything I thought I knew about what lives in these woods. I've always been the type of ranger who takes the dangerous assignments. While other rangers prefer working the visitor centers or maintain trails, I volunteer for the backcountry patrols, the places where cell phones don't work and you might not see another person for days. My supervisor always said I was either very brave or very stupid. After what happened, I'm starting to think it was the second one. I grew up hearing stories from the old-timers, loggers and hunters who'd worked these mountains for decades. They'd talk about things they'd seen in the deep woods, strange animals that didn't match anything in the field guides. But there was one story that always stuck with me, even though I never believed it. They called it the ball and chain. Some kind of mountain lion with a tail so heavy it could crush a man's skull like an egg. I always figured it was just campfire talk, something to scare the tourists and new workers. But last October, I learned that some stories are true, and some monsters are real. October 15th started like any other patrol day. I was assigned to Section 7, a remote area about 30 miles east of the main ranger station. It's rough country up there. Steep trails, thick forest, and elevations that reach over 4,000 feet. The nearest road is a good 10-mile hike, which means if something goes wrong, you're on your own until someone notices you're missing. I've been patrolling that section for 3 years. I know every trail, every camping spot, every water source. It's beautiful country, but it's dangerous too. The terrain is unforgiving, and the weather can change from sunny to deadly in less than an hour. We lose at least 2 hikers a year in that area, usually from falls or exposure. My equipment that day was standard issue: GPS unit, 2-way radio, first aid kit, and my personal .357 revolver. The radio only works in certain spots where you can get line of sight to the repeater towers. Most of the time, you're hiking in complete radio silence. The reason I was up there was a series of incident reports that had been coming in over the past month. 3 separate hikers had been found dead on the trails, all experienced backpackers who knew what they were doing. But here's the strange part. They all died the same way. Massive head trauma. Like something had hit them with incredible force from above. The state police investigated, of course. They figured it was rockfall or maybe tree branches during windstorms. But something about the reports bothered me. The injuries were too precise, too focused. and there were no rocks or branches near the bodies that could have caused that kind of damage. My supervisor, Jim Martinez, called me into his office the day before my patrol. He spread the incident reports across his desk and shook his head. "Sarah, I need you to take a look at these locations. See if you can find anything the investigators missed. The families are asking questions, and the media is starting to pay attention." I studied the reports carefully. All 3 victims were found within a 5-mile stretch of the same trail. All had suffered what the coroner called catastrophic blunt force trauma to the skull. The injuries were so severe that identification had to be made through dental records. "What do you think happened?" I asked Jim. He rubbed his temples like he was getting a headache. "Honestly, I have no idea. But we can't have people dying in our park. If we can't figure out what's causing this, we might have to close that entire section." The weather forecast called for clear skies and temperatures in the mid-50s. Perfect hiking weather. I loaded my pack with extra water and food, planning to spend 2 full days in the area. I wanted to examine each death site carefully and look for any patterns the initial investigation might have missed. I reached the first death site around noon. According to the report, a 3-4-year-old hiker named Michael Torres had been found here 3 weeks earlier. His tent was still set up, his pack undisturbed, but he was lying 20 feet away with his head completely destroyed. I spent an hour going over every inch of the area. The investigating team had done a thorough job. They'd measured everything, taken photos, collected samples. But I noticed something they hadn't mentioned in their report. There were claw marks on the trees. Not normal claw marks like you'd see from a black bear or cougar. These were deep gouges in the bark, 40 feet off the ground. No cat I knew could climb that high and still have the strength to leave marks that deep. I pulled out my camera and documented everything. The marks appeared fresh, maybe a few weeks old. They formed a pattern, like something had been gripping the trunk while moving through the canopy. But what really got my attention was the way the branches were broken. Large branches, some as thick as my arm, had been snapped cleanly, not from wind or age, but from something heavy moving through them. The breaks were fresh, with sap still oozing from the wounds. Whatever had done this was big, and it had been here recently. I checked my GPS and marked the location. Then I hiked to the second death site, about 2 miles down the trail. The pattern was the same. High claw marks on the trees, broken branches in the canopy, and something else I hadn't expected to find, drag marks in the dirt. Not drag marks from a body being moved. These were different. Deep grooves in the earth, like something incredibly heavy had been dragged across the ground. The marks were about 6 inches wide and several feet long. They led from the base of a large Douglas fir to the spot where the second victim, Lisa Chang, had been found. I knelt down and examined the marks more closely. Whatever had made them was heavy enough to compress the forest floor down to the hard-packed dirt underneath. I tried to imagine what could weigh that much and still be able to climb trees 40 feet high. My radio crackled to life. "Ranger 7, this is base. Radio check, over." I was in one of the few spots where the radio worked. "Base, this is Ranger 7. I'm at the second incident site. I'm finding some unusual evidence. Request permission to extend patrol to 3 days. Negative, Ranger 7. Storm front moving in tomorrow night. You need to be back at the trailhead by 1800 hours tomorrow." "Copy that, base. Ranger 7 out." I looked up at the sky. Still clear, but I could see clouds building on the horizon. I had maybe 30 hours to figure out what was happening in these woods. The third death site was another mile down the trail. By the time I reached it, the sun was getting low in the sky. I had maybe 2 hours of good daylight left. This site was different, more violent. The tree damage was extensive, with several small trees completely uprooted. The ground was torn up like a battlefield. And there was something else, something that made my skin crawl. Practice marks. Scattered around the area were impact craters in the ground. Perfect circles, about 18 inches across and 6 inches deep. Like something round and heavy had been dropped repeatedly from a great height. The spacing was deliberate, methodical. Someone or something had been testing their aim. I counted 12 impact sites. Each one was positioned near the spot where victim number 3, Robert Kim, no relation, despite the same last name, had been found. It was like watching someone practice for a perfect shot. The sun was setting fast and I needed to make camp. I found a flat spot about a half-mile from the third death site and set up my tent. Standard procedure was to hang all food in a bear bag, but I also secured my pack with extra rope. Something told me bears weren't the biggest threat in these woods. As darkness fell, I sat outside my tent and listened to the forest. The normal sounds were all wrong. No owl calls, no small animals rustling in the underbrush. Even the insects seemed unusually quiet. It was like every living thing in the area was hiding. Around midnight, I heard the first sound, thud. It came from somewhere above me, followed by a rustling in the tree branches. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it up into the canopy. Nothing, just leaves swaying in the still air. Thud, closer this time, and now I could hear something else, a dragging sound, like a heavy rope being pulled across tree branches. I unholstered my .357 and kept the flashlight trained on the trees above my campsite. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whatever was up there could hear it. Thud, thud, thud. The sounds were moving in a circle around my camp. Each impact shook the ground slightly. I could feel the vibrations through my boots. Then, silence. I sat there for 3 hours, weapon ready, listening for any sound that didn't belong. But whatever had been up there was gone. Or at least, it was being very quiet. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear the sound of branches moving overhead. When dawn finally came, I was exhausted but determined to solve this mystery. I packed up camp and hiked back to examine the area around my campsite. What I found made my blood run cold. Fresh claw marks on the trees directly above where I'd pitched my tent. And more of those impact craters formed in a perfect circle around my campsite. 18 holes in the ground, each one deeper than the practice marks I'd found the day before. Whatever was stalking these woods had been testing its accuracy. Using my tent as target practice, I needed to get photos of everything. But first, I wanted to check the trail cameras. The Park Service had installed motion-activated cameras throughout this section after the first death. They were supposed to help us track wildlife movement and monitor for illegal camping. The first camera was mounted on a tree about 20 feet from the trail. When I checked the memory card, most of the footage was normal. Deer, elk, a few black bears. But there was one clip from 2 nights ago that didn't make sense. At 2:47 a.m., something large moved past the camera. The motion trigger caught about 8 seconds of footage. In the infrared image, I could see what looked like a mountain lion, but it was huge, bigger than any cougar I'd ever seen, and its tail. The tail was massive, thick as a telephone pole, and dragging behind the animal as it moved. At the end of the tail was a bulbous shape, like a club or a ball. The creature moved through the trees with incredible agility, despite the obvious weight of that appendage. I watched the clip 10 times, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Mountain lions don't have tails like that. Nothing in North America has a tail like that. I checked 2 more cameras. Same thing, multiple clips of the creature moving through the area over the past week. Always at night, always moving through the tree canopy instead of on the ground. In one clip, I watched it practice with its tail. The animal positioned itself on a thick branch about 30 feet up, then swung its tail down to strike a fallen log on the ground. The impact was tremendous. The log, which was probably 2 feet thick, split completely in half. That's when I understood what had killed those hikers. And I realized I was in serious danger. I needed to get back to the radio point and call for backup, but as I started hiking toward the nearest communication site, I began to notice I was being followed. Shadows moving in my peripheral vision. Branches swaying when there was no wind, and always that faint dragging sound from somewhere above me. Every few hundred yards, I'd stop and scan the canopy with my binoculars. For the first few stops, I saw nothing. Then, on my 5th stop, I saw it. The ball and chain was real. It was perched on a branch about 60 feet up, perfectly camouflaged against the bark of an old-growth Douglas fir. If it hadn't moved slightly, I never would have spotted it. The creature was beautiful in a terrifying way. The body was that of a mountain lion, but easily twice the size of any cougar I'd ever seen. Its coat was a perfect mix of browns and grays that blended seamlessly with the tree bark. But that tail, the tail was a nightmare. It had to be 8 feet long and thick as a tree trunk. The end was swollen into a solid mass that looked like bone or stone, As I watched, the creature shifted its weight, and the tail moved with obvious effort. Whatever that club was made of, it was incredibly heavy. The animal's eyes locked onto mine through my binoculars. Intelligent eyes. Predator eyes. It knew I had seen it, and it didn't care. If anything, it seemed pleased. I lowered the binoculars and started walking again, trying to appear calm. But inside, I was terrified. This thing had been stalking me since yesterday. It could have killed me any time it wanted. The fact that it hadn't meant it was playing with me. I made it another mile before the attack started. The first strike came without warning. A tremendous crash behind me, followed by the sound of splintering wood. I spun around to see a crater in the ground where I'd been standing 5 seconds earlier. A small pine tree next to the trail had been completely destroyed. I looked up and saw the ball and chain repositioning itself in the branches above me. It had swung its tail like a medieval mace, missing me by less than 10 feet. The crater was 2 feet deep and 3 feet across. I started running. Behind me, I could hear the creature moving through the trees, branch after branch snapping under its weight as it followed my route. Every few seconds, there would be another crash as its tail struck the ground near me. The thing was toying with me. Each strike was perfectly aimed to miss by just a few feet. It could have killed me instantly, but it was enjoying the hunt. I reached for my radio, hoping I was close enough to a repeater to call for help. But before I could key the microphone, the ball and chain dropped from the trees directly in front of me. The impact shook the ground like a small earthquake. The creature landed in a crouch, that massive tail coiled behind it like a scorpion's stinger. Up close, it was even more terrifying. This wasn't just a large cougar. This was something evolved specifically for killing. The animal's head tilted slightly as it studied me. Its eyes were completely focused, like a house cat watching a mouse. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised its tail high above its head. I dove to the right just as the tail came down. The impact where I'd been standing was tremendous. The force drove the tail club 6 inches into the packed earth, and I felt the shockwave through my entire body. I scrambled to my feet and kept running, but the creature was faster. It bounded past me in 2 effortless leaps, then positioned itself in the trail ahead. Again, the tail rose up like a sledgehammer preparing to strike. This time, I couldn't dodge fast enough. The tail caught me a glancing blow on my left shoulder. Even though it wasn't a direct hit, the impact spun me completely around and sent me flying into a cluster of small trees. I felt my collarbone snap, and my left arm went completely numb. The pain was incredible, but the fear was worse. I could hear the creature moving closer, that heavy tail dragging across the forest floor. I tried to crawl away, but my left arm wasn't working, and my vision was starting to blur. The ball and chain appeared in front of me again. This time, it didn't hurry. It walked slowly, deliberately, like it had all the time in the world. Its tail swayed back and forth behind it, gouging deep furrows in the dirt. I managed to draw my 357 with my good hand. The creature saw the weapon and actually seemed amused. It sat back on its haunches, tail curled beside it, and waited to see what I would do. I fired all 6 rounds center mass. Every shot hit, but they might as well have been spitballs. The creature's hide was incredibly thick, and the bullets barely penetrated. A few drops of blood appeared on its chest, but otherwise, it was completely unaffected. The ball and chain stood up and moved closer. I could smell its breath now, hot and metallic, like blood and raw meat. Its tail rose up one final time, positioning itself directly above my head. I closed my eyes and waited for the end. But instead of the crushing blow I expected, I heard a sound that saved my life. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors. The search and rescue team had found me. The ball and chain heard it too. Its head snapped up, scanning the sky. For the first time since the encounter began, the creature looked uncertain. It glanced back down at me, then up at the approaching helicopter. With a sound that was part snarl and part disappointed hiss, the ball and chain bounded away into the trees. Within seconds, it had vanished completely, leaving only broken branches and deep gouges in the earth as evidence it had ever been there. The helicopter crew found me unconscious from blood loss and shock. They airlifted me to Portland General Hospital, where I spent 3 weeks recovering from my injuries. Shattered collarbone, separated shoulder, severe concussion, and dozens of cuts and bruises from being thrown into the trees. The official report listed my injuries as the result of a rockfall. When I tried to tell my supervisors what really happened, they suggested I take extended medical leave to recover from my traumatic head injury. The trail cameras I'd checked, all mysteriously damaged beyond repair. The memory cards were missing. Any evidence of the ball and chain had vanished. They closed Section 7 indefinitely, citing unstable geological conditions. But I know the real reason. 3 more hikers disappeared in that area before they put up the barriers. All found with the same massive head trauma, all killed by something the authorities refuse to acknowledge exists. I returned to work 6 months later, but I requested a transfer to a different section. I couldn't go back to those woods. Not after what I'd seen. My supervisor agreed, probably thinking I was still dealing with psychological trauma from my accident. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake at night. Last month, we started getting reports from a different area. Cascade Range, about 50 miles north of Section 7. Hikers found dead with massive blunt force trauma to the skull. Strange claw marks high up in the trees, impact craters in the forest floor. The ball and chain is still out there, still hunting, still practicing its aim. I've tried to warn other rangers, but nobody believes me. They think I suffered brain damage in my fall. They don't understand that some legends are true. Some monsters are real. If you're planning to hike in the Oregon Cascade Mountains, especially in remote areas, please be careful. Stay on marked trails. Camp in groups. And if you ever hear a heavy dragging sound coming from the trees above you, don't look up, just run. Because once the ball and chain decides you're its next target, there's nowhere you can hide that it can't reach. And when that tail comes down, you won't get a second chance. I still work as a park ranger, but I stay in the visitor centers now. I help families plan safe day hikes and give talks about wildlife safety. It's good work, important work. But every time someone asks about backpacking in the remote sections, I do everything I can to talk them out of it. Some parts of the forest should be left alone. Some trails should never be walked, and some creatures should remain nothing more than stories told around campfires. I learned that lesson the hard way. I just hope others don't have to learn it the same way I did. The ball and chain is still out there, somewhere in those mountains, still hunting, still killing, and it's still practicing. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been running heavy equipment for 12 years now. Started right out of high school with a summer job on my uncle's road crew, and just never stopped. Got my CDL, my crane operator license, even my blasting permit. I've cleared forests for shopping malls, leveled mountains for highways, and moved more dirt than I can count. I thought I'd seen everything the woods could throw at a construction crew. But what happened last fall near Mount Hood changed everything I thought I knew about the Oregon wilderness. Some places aren't meant to be touched by human hands. The Cascade Development Group hired our crew to clear 300 acres of old-growth forest for a new subdivision called Woodland Heights. Fancy name for what was basically going to be another cookie-cutter neighborhood with houses packed so tight you could hear your neighbors sneeze. The money was good though, really good. Enough to finally pay off my truck and maybe put a down payment on that little cabin I'd been looking at up near the Columbia River. Our crew was small but experienced. Me on the Cat 320 excavator, Tommy Chen running the bulldozer, Marcus Williams on the skidder pulling logs, and our foreman Dale Hutchins coordinating everything from his pickup truck. We'd worked together for 3 years, and we knew how to strip a forest down to bare dirt faster than anyone in the state. The company liked us because we were efficient and didn't ask too many questions about environmental permits or spotted owl surveys. The forest we were clearing sat about 15 miles east of Mount Hood, thick with Douglas fir trees that had been growing for over 200 years. Some of those trees were 8 feet across at the base. It felt wrong cutting them down, but that's not my call to make. I run the equipment, the company makes the decisions, and the bank makes my truck payments. That's how it works. The first day went normal. We set up our staging area near the access road, checked our equipment, and started marking trees for removal. The forest was darker than most I'd worked in. Those old fir trees grew so thick that even at noon, the canopy blocked out most of the sunlight, made everything feel cold and quiet, like being inside a cathedral. Dale had us working 12-hour shifts to meet the deadline. The faster we cleared the land, the faster Cascade could start grading for the subdivision. By the time we finished that first day, we'd taken down about 2 acres worth of trees. Not bad for getting started, but we had a long way to go. That's when things started getting weird. I came in the next morning to find my excavator vandalized. At first I thought it was just kids messing around, but when I got closer, I realized this wasn't spray paint or broken windows. Something had clawed deep gouges through the steel on my cab door. 4 parallel scratches, each one about 3 inches long and deep enough to see metal shavings curled up like tiny wood chips. What the hell did this? I called out to Tommy, who was inspecting his bulldozer. Same thing that got mine, he said, pointing to similar claw marks across his blade. And look at this. The hydraulic lines on both our machines had been cut. Not torn or bitten, but sliced clean through with something sharp enough to punch through reinforced rubber. Whoever did this knew exactly where to cut to disable the equipment without causing permanent damage. Has to be environmental protesters, Dale said when we called him over. Probably tree huggers trying to stop the job. But I'd tangled with eco-protesters before, and they usually just chained themselves to trees or slashed tires. This was different. This was surgical. Whoever did this understood hydraulic systems and knew exactly how to disable heavy equipment. Plus, the claw marks were too deep and too wide to come from any tool I'd ever seen. We spent the morning fixing the hydraulic lines and filing a police report. Sheriff's deputy took pictures but didn't seem too interested. Said they'd increase patrols in the area. But I could tell he thought it was just vandalism. That afternoon, Marcus found the tracks. "Jake, you need to see this," he called from the edge of our work area. He was standing next to a muddy patch near the creek, staring down at the ground. The print was huge, about 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, with 5 distinct toe marks ending in claw impressions. But what made my skin crawl was the fact that it looked partly human. The heel was elongated like a wolf paw, but the toes were spread out like fingers, like something that could grab things. "Bear?" Tommy suggested, but his voice didn't sound convinced. "Bears don't have thumbs," I said, pointing to the clear impression of an opposable digit on the side of the track. "And they don't cut hydraulic lines." We found more tracks leading away from our equipment and disappearing into the thick undergrowth. Some were the full paw prints like the first one, but others showed only the front portion, as if whatever made them had been walking upright and only the toes were touching the ground. Dale radioed the sheriff again, but they said animal control wasn't their department and we should call the state wildlife office if we were worried about bears. We all knew this wasn't about bears, but nobody wanted to say what we were really thinking. That night, I volunteered to stay late and guard the equipment. Brought my Remington 870 and a thermos of coffee and parked my truck where I could watch all our machines. Figured if someone was playing games, I'd put a stop to it real quick. Around 10 p.m., the howling started. At first, it sounded like coyotes, which wouldn't be unusual. But as I listened closer, I realized the sounds were wrong. Too deep, too long, and with a rhythm that seemed almost like language. Like something trying to talk through the animal's throat. The howling came from 3 different directions, surrounding our work site. I could tell there were multiple animals out there, and they were coordinating with each other. Call and response, with distinct patterns that repeated every few minutes. I turned on my truck's high beams and swept them across the tree line. That's when I saw the eyes. Red eyes, glowing like reflectors, but positioned about 7 feet off the ground. Too high for any normal animal, and too widely spaced to be anything I recognized. As my headlights hit them, they didn't dart away like deer or elk would. They just watched me, studying me. I grabbed my shotgun and fired a warning shot into the air. The boom echoed through the forest, and the howling stopped immediately. The red eyes disappeared, melting back into the darkness between the trees. But 20 minutes later, they were back. Different positions, but the same red glow, same unnatural height. This time there were more of them. At least 6 pairs that I could count, arranged in a rough circle around our equipment. I spent the rest of the night in my truck with the engine running and the doors locked, sweeping my headlights back and forth across the forest. Every time I looked, the eyes were there. Watching. Waiting, but never coming closer. When Dale and the crew showed up at dawn, the eyes vanished like they'd never been there. "Find anything?" Dale asked as I climbed out of my truck, stiff and tired. "Maybe," I said, leading them to the trees where I'd seen the watchers. What we found made my blood run cold. The bark on every tree at eye level had been clawed with deep, deliberate marks. Not random scratches, but organized patterns. Symbols, like someone was leaving messages. The marks were fresh, still bleeding sap, and arranged in groups of 3 or 4 lines. Some curved like crescents, others formed X patterns or parallel slashes. It looked like a primitive alphabet carved into living wood. "Definitely protesters," Dale muttered, but he didn't sound convinced either. We tried to work that day, but none of us could concentrate. Every shadow in the forest seemed to be watching us. Every branch that cracked sounded like footsteps. We kept our radios on the same channel and stayed within sight of each other. Around lunchtime, Tommy found something that made us all stop working. "There's something in the trees," he called over the radio. About 50 yards north of my position. We all gathered around his bulldozer and looked where he was pointing. High up in an old fir tree, maybe 40 feet off the ground, something large and dark was moving through the branches. It was big enough to bend thick limbs as it passed, but moving with a grace that no bear could manage. "What is that?" Marcus whispered. Before anyone could answer, the thing stopped moving and looked down at us. Even from that distance, I could see the red eyes and the wrong shape of its head. Too long for a bear, too broad for a cougar, and it was clearly watching us with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. We stared at each other for maybe 30 seconds. Then the creature turned and vanished deeper into the canopy, moving from tree to tree without ever touching the ground. "I'm calling this in," Dale said, reaching for his radio. "Calling what in?" I asked. "What are you going to tell them?" Dale lowered the radio without keying it. He didn't have an answer. That night, I brought my neighbor's 2 German shepherds to help guard the site. Duke and Ranger were trained guard dogs, mean as snakes and absolutely fearless. I figured if protesters or vandals showed up, the dogs would either scare them off or at least give me warning. I chained them up near the equipment and settled in for another long night. For the first few hours, everything was quiet. The dogs dozed in the back of my truck, and I started to think maybe we'd scared off whatever was messing with us. Then, around midnight, both dogs started whining. They weren't barking or growling like they would at strangers. They were whimpering like scared puppies, trying to hide under my truck seats. I'd never seen them act like that before. The howling started again, but this time it was different. Closer, and there was something else mixed in with the animal sounds. Something that sounded almost like words. "Leave, leave, leave." The voice was deep and rough, like someone gargling gravel, but the word was clear enough. Whatever was out there was trying to talk to me. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the forest. The red eyes were there again, but this time they were much closer. Close enough that I could make out shapes moving between the trees. Large, upright figures that seemed to blend with the shadows. "This is private property," I shouted. "I'm armed and I've called the police." The howling stopped, but the shapes kept moving, circling. I could hear branches snapping and leaves rustling as they repositioned themselves around our worksite. One of the German shepherds let out a terrified yelp and broke its chain. It jumped out of my truck and ran straight into the forest, away from whatever was watching us. The other dog followed a few seconds later, both of them disappearing into the darkness. I never saw those dogs again. The next morning, Dale found what was left of them. Duke and Ranger were arranged in a perfect circle, about 100 yards from our equipment. They hadn't been torn apart randomly like you'd expect from a wild animal attack. They'd been killed with surgical precision, single deep wounds to the throat, and then positioned deliberately, laid out with their heads pointing toward our worksite like arrows. "This is a message," Dale said quietly. "Something's trying to tell us to leave." We called the sheriff again, and this time they sent out a detective. He took pictures, collected samples, and asked a lot of questions we couldn't answer. But at the end of the day, his report just said, "wild animal attack," and recommended we hire security if we were worried about our equipment. That afternoon, Marcus quit, packed up his gear, and drove away without saying goodbye. Can't say I blamed him. The whole forest felt wrong now, like something was watching every move we made. Tommy and I talked about quitting too, but Dale reminded us about the completion bonus we'd lose if we walked off the job. Plus, word gets around in the construction business. If we got a reputation for running away from projects, it would be hard to find work later. So we stayed. And that was our mistake. The next few days passed without incident. No vandalism, no strange tracks, no red eyes in the darkness. We started to think maybe we'd imagined the whole thing, or maybe whatever was bothering us had finally moved on. We were wrong. On Friday morning, we found Roger Hutchins' hard hat sitting on my excavator seat. Roger was Dale's younger brother, working as a surveyor for Cascade Development. He'd been marking trees for removal the day before and was supposed to meet us at the site that morning. The hard hat was filled with blood and human teeth. We called 911 immediately. Sheriff's Department, State Police, and Search and Rescue all showed up within an hour. They found Roger's body about a quarter mile into the forest, and what they found didn't make sense. He'd been killed sometime during the night, but not by any wild animal they'd ever seen. The body had been dismembered with precise cuts, like someone with medical training had taken it apart. But the pieces were arranged in a pattern around the base of a massive old fir tree, surrounded by those same strange symbols carved into the bark. Ritual killing, one of the detectives muttered. Probably some kind of cult. But I knew it wasn't human killers. The tracks around Roger's body were the same oversized paw prints we'd been finding all week. And there were other signs that the investigators missed or ignored. Claw marks on nearby trees, all positioned 7 feet off the ground. Tufts of coarse hair caught on branches, and a smell in the air like wet dog mixed with something wild and musky. Cascade Development shut down the project temporarily while the police investigated. They brought in private security and installed motion-activated cameras around the worksite. But the investigation didn't turn up any human suspects, and after 2 weeks, the insurance company pressured them to resume clearing. "We've got deadlines to meet," Dale told us when we reported back to work. The company hired armed security guards to watch the site at night. Whatever killed Roger is long gone by now. The security team consisted of 4 ex-military contractors with automatic weapons and night vision equipment. They looked competent and professional, and I started to feel safer about working in the forest. That feeling lasted exactly 1 night. The contractors were found the next morning, arranged in the same ritualistic pattern as Roger's body. All 4 men killed with the same surgical precision, then positioned around another old fir tree with fresh symbols carved into the bark above them. The strange thing was, their weapons were untouched. Loaded magazines, safeties off, but not a single shot fired. Whatever killed them had moved too fast for trained soldiers to react. This time, Cascade brought in what they called specialized security consultants. Basically a private military team that dealt with unusual situations. They set up camp with thermal imaging, motion sensors, and enough firepower to stop a small army. But they also made it clear they weren't there to protect us workers. Their job was to secure the site so clearing operations could continue. We were on our own. "Pack it up, boys," Dale said after talking to the consultants. "I'm not losing any more men to whatever's out there." We started packing our equipment that afternoon. But before we could finish, the military team leader called Dale over for a meeting. "The company wants you to stay," Dale told us when he came back. "They're offering triple overtime and a $50,000 completion bonus for the crew." That was serious money. Enough to change my life. Enough to make me consider staying despite everything we'd seen. Tommy decided to leave, and I don't blame him. But Dale and I agreed to stick it out for 1 more week. Just long enough to clear the immediate area and let the military team handle whatever was in the deeper forest. We should have known better. That night, something came for the military team. I was sleeping in a trailer at the edge of the work site when the shooting started. Automatic weapons fire, flashes of light in the darkness, and men shouting orders over radio static. It lasted maybe 5 minutes, then everything went quiet. In the morning, we found the evidence of a battle. Spent shell casings everywhere, scorch marks from explosives, and trees cut down by gunfire. But no bodies. The entire 6-man team had vanished without a trace. Their equipment was still there. Radios, weapons, even their night vision goggles. But the men themselves were gone, like they'd been plucked right out of their gear. The only clue to what happened was a series of massive claw marks gouged into the armored side of their command vehicle. Marks too deep and too wide to come from any animal I'd ever heard of. That's when I finally saw one of them clearly. I was loading my excavator onto the transport trailer when movement in the tree line caught my eye. A figure stepped out from behind a massive fir tree and stood watching me from about 100 yards away. It was 7 feet tall and covered in dark, coarse fur. The body was humanoid but massively muscled, with arms that hung down past its knees. The face was the worst part, a horrible mix of human and wolf features, with intelligent eyes that glowed red in the forest shadows. We stared at each other for maybe a minute. Then the creature opened its mouth and spoke in that same gravelly voice I'd heard before. "You helped destroy our home," it said, each word carefully pronounced. "You choose now, leave or feed the earth like others." The thing wasn't just an animal, it was intelligent. It could reason and make decisions and speak broken English. And it was giving me an ultimatum. "I'm just doing my job." I called back, surprised to hear my own voice shaking. The creature tilted its head like it was considering my answer. Then it raised one clawed hand and pointed at the fresh stumps where we'd cut down the old trees. "Your job kills our children," it said. "Your job destroys what cannot be remade. Your choice now." Before I could respond, it turned and disappeared back into the forest, moving with impossible silence for something so large. I finished loading my equipment and drove straight to Cascade's office in Portland. Told them I was done, completion bonus or no completion bonus. They tried to talk me out of it, offered more money, threatened to blacklist me from other projects. But I'd made my choice. The forest belonged to something that had been there long before humans arrived, and it was willing to kill to protect what was left of its home. I wasn't going to be the next body arranged around a tree trunk. Dale stayed, said he needed the money too badly to walk away. 3 days later, his truck was found at the worksite, engine still running but empty. The search team found his body arranged in the same ritual pattern as the others, surrounded by fresh symbols carved deep into the bark. Cascade Development abandoned the project after that. The insurance company wouldn't cover any more deaths, and no security firm would take the contract. Last I heard, they sold the land to the state for a fraction of what they'd paid, and it's been designated as protected wilderness. I still drive past the access road sometimes when I'm working jobs in the Mount Hood area. The gate is chained shut now, and the forest is growing back over our old work site. But late at night, if you know where to look, you can still see red eyes watching from the tree line. Some places aren't meant to be touched by human hands, and some things will kill to protect what's left of the wild world. I learned that lesson the hard way, but at least I learned it while I was still alive to tell about it. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been running heavy equipment for 12 years. But I'll never clear another old-growth forest as long as I live. Some jobs just aren't worth the money.